They say the frontier doesn't forgive weakness, but what happens when two hearts defy that law? She was a settler's daughter, born of plows and promises. He was the heir to a Lakota chief, raised on wind and silence. Their first meeting wasn't scripted by fate. It was carved out by risk. One arrow in the dirt, one heartbeat held too long, and everything changed. In a land where love was considered a luxury and legacy, a burden, Evelyn and Lakota crossed a line neither tribe nor town could accept. They didn't mean to start a fire, but once lit, it burned through everything: law, blood, loyalty. This ain't just a story of forbidden love. It's about the cost of truth, about building a home from nothing but exile, defiance, and a name whispered to the wind. And sometimes, the fiercest battles are fought without a shot, fired just two people standing still while the world demands they run. What did you think of today's story? If it brought you any warmth or made you smile even for a second, drop a simple "good" in the comments below. Got your own thoughts or feelings? I'd love to hear them seriously. And hey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's free, and it truly helps us grow this space for stories that matter. Thanks so much for being here. The late autumn sun, already losing its summer ferocity, cast long, grasping shadows across the Wyoming territory as Lydia Thorne pushed deeper into Whisperwind Forest. It was a place of secrets, this dense tangle of pine, aspen, and knotted undergrowth that lay like a contested breath between the lands claimed by the Cheyenne and the Raw. Burgeoning settlement of Fort Resolve, a crystalline stream, cold and clear, threaded its way over moss-slicked stones, its murmur a constant, soothing counterpoint to the restless sigh of the wind in the high branches. This was Lydia's sanctuary, a place she came to fetch sweet water. Yes, but more often to escape the stifling confines of the Thorne Ranch and the unyielding, unspoken rules that governed life within the fort's protective, yet suffocating, embrace. Lydia wasn't cut from the same drab cloth as most of the settlement women. While they contented themselves with mending, baking, and the endless cycle of domesticity, a wild, unquenchable curiosity burned in Lydia's spirit. She possessed a quiet rebelliousness, a yearning for horizons broader than the dusty streets of Fort Resolve and the stern, disapproving gaze of her father, Josiah Thorne. He was a man of rigid principles and even more rigid prejudices, seeing the world in stark shades of black and white, with little room for the subtle hues Lydia found so captivating in the wildness of the forest. She'd just dipped her wooden bucket into the stream, the cold water shocking her fingers, when the thwack of an arrow biting into the damp earth less than an inch from her worn leather boot sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror through her. Her heart leaped into her throat, a frantic, trapped bird. Before she could scream, a figure materialized from the dense shadows of an ancient pine. He was tall, impossibly lean, his movements as fluid and silent as the forest creatures he emulated. His bronze skin was starkly adorned with streaks of black and ochre war paint, his dark, piercing eyes holding an intensity that seemed to strip away all pretense, all defense. This was Nakoma, a Cheyenne warrior, son of the formidable Chief Red Cloud. Lydia's initial fear was a suffocating wave, threatening to pull her under. This was the savage her father had warned her about, the faceless enemy whose presence haunted the edges of their fragile civilization. But as her gaze locked with Nakoma's, she saw something beyond the warrior's intimidating facade. Not the unthinking, brutal hostility she'd been taught to expect, but a keen, assessing intelligence, a stillness that was more watchful than menacing. Nakoma's voice, when he finally spoke, was a low rumble, his English surprisingly proficient, though tinged with the melodic cadence of his own tongue. "You should not be so deep in this forest alone, white woman," he said, his gaze unwavering, "This is not a safe place for you." Lydia swallowed hard, forcing herself to find her voice, though her heart still hammered against her ribs like a trapped drum. "This forest belongs to no one," she managed, a tremor in her tone belying her attempted bravado. "I have as much right to be here as you." A flicker of surprise, quickly suppressed, crossed Nakoma's stoic features. Then, the barest hint of a smile, a fleeting warmth that touched his eyes before vanishing, ghosted across his lips. "You are different from your people," he observed, his voice softer now. "They see only what they want to see, what they are told to see. You see with your own eyes." He stooped, retrieving the bucket Lydia had dropped in her fright, the water sloshing over its rim. As he handed it back to her, their fingers brushed, a fleeting, accidental contact, yet a strange current, an unexpected jolt of awareness, passed between them, a fragile, almost imperceptible thread connecting two souls from vastly different, hostile worlds. Lydia snatched her hand back as if burned, her cheeks flushing, despite the fear that still prickled her skin. Despite the ingrained warnings of her upbringing, Lydia found herself drawn back to the Whisper Wind's edge in the days that followed. The forest, once just a place of escape, now held a new, dangerous allure, and Nakoma was there, as if by an unspoken arrangement, a silent, watchful presence in the dappled sunlight and deep shadows. Their initial encounters were brief, fraught with a mixture of trepidation and an undeniable, magnetic pull. They began to talk, hesitantly at first, then with a growing ease. Lydia learned that Nakoma was indeed the son of Red Cloud, destined one day to lead his people. Nakoma, in turn, discovered that Lydia was the daughter of Josiah Thorne, a man whose influence in Fort Resolve was considerable, a man known for his unyielding stance against the Cheyenne. They shared fragments of their lives, glimpses into their separate realities. Lydia spoke of the rigid expectations, the stifling propriety of the settlement, her longing for a freedom she could only taste in the wild solitude of the forest. Nakoma described the harsh beauty of the plains, the deep spiritual connection his people had with the land, the constant struggle to preserve their way of life against the encroaching tide of the white man. "Your world," Lydia said one afternoon, her voice tinged with a wistful envy as they sat on sun-warmed rocks overlooking the stream. "It seems so untamed, so free." Nakoma's gaze was distant, a shadow in his dark eyes. "Freedom always demands its price." "Lydia," he replied, his voice somber, "a price often paid in blood and sorrow. Your world, for all its fences and its laws, is no different." I think, through these clandestine meetings, the initial spark of curiosity, the reluctant fascination, began to smolder, then to burn. An undeniable affection blossomed between them, a love as wild and untamable as the Whisperwind Forest itself, a love that defied the formidable barriers of culture, race, and the bitter, ingrained enmity that festered between their peoples. Lydia found herself thinking of him constantly, the image of his strong, painted face, his piercing eyes, imprinted on her mind. She even imagined he might call her a pony, Butterfly, a name as delicate and free as the feelings he stirred within her. But such a forbidden bloom could not remain hidden for long in the harsh light of their respective worlds. Josiah Thorne, a man whose suspicions were easily aroused where the Cheyenne were concerned, began to notice Lydia's increasingly frequent and lengthy absences. Her older sister, Martha, a woman whose own life was a study in quiet resignation, watched Lydia with a mixture of concern and a subtle, unspoken envy for the very spirit that led Lydia into such peril. Whispers began to circulate within the fort, the first true test of their fragile, dangerous bond came with the unexpected suddenness of a summer storm. Lydia and Nakoma had ventured deeper into the forest than usual, seeking a more secluded spot, A hidden glade Nakoma knew, where the ancient trees formed a sheltering canopy. They were sharing a piece of dried venison, the comfortable silence between them more eloquent than any words. When Nakoma suddenly stiffened, his head cocked, his entire being instantly alert. "Quiet," he hissed, his voice a low, urgent whisper that sent a chill down Lydia's spine. "Do not move. Men are coming." Before Lydia could fully comprehend, the distant, unmistakable sounds reached her ears. The baying of hunting hounds, the crackle of undergrowth being broken, the faint, intermittent shouts of men, a hunting party from Fort Resolve. Her blood ran cold. If they were discovered, Nakoma didn't hesitate. There was no time for lengthy explanations, no room for Lydia's fear. His mind, honed by a lifetime of survival in a world where a moment's indecision could mean death, worked with lightning speed, with a swift, urgent gesture for Lydia to remain hidden in the dense thicket where they sat. He moved. He was a phantom, a whisper of motion. Lydia, peering through the leaves, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it would break free, saw him scoop up a handful of loose earth and smear it on his arms and face, further breaking his outline. Then, taking a deep breath, he let out a sound that was a perfect imitation of a startled bull elk, a bellowing snort that echoed through the trees, deliberately in a direction away from their hiding place. He vanished then, melting into the undergrowth with a speed and silence that defied belief. Lydia could hear the hunting party's shouts change direction, the hounds baying with renewed excitement as they took up the false trail. She pressed herself flat against the damp earth, praying with a fervor she hadn't known she possessed. Her fear for Nakama, a suffocating weight in her chest, she understood, with a clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The immense risk he had taken, he was deliberately drawing the hunters, possibly her own father among them, away from her, offering himself as a potential target to ensure her safety. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The sounds of the hunt receded into the distance. Silence, heavy and profound, returned to the glade, broken only by Lydia's ragged breathing and the frantic thumping of her own heart. Nakoma did not return immediately. Lydia was alone, truly alone, in the vast, indifferent wilderness. A wave of desolation washed over her, quickly followed by a surge of emotions so powerful they left her trembling. Fear, gratitude, and a love that now felt terrifyingly, irrevocably deep. This was no longer a romantic dream, no girlish fancy. This was real. This was dangerous. This was a love that demanded sacrifice, a love that walked hand in hand with the specter of death. The innocence of their secret meetings was gone, shattered by the harsh reality of the world that lay just beyond the whisper wind's protective embrace. Their perilous journey had truly begun. The stark realization in Whisper Wind Forest that Nakoma had risked his life for hers had irrevocably altered the landscape of Lydia Thorne's world. The fear, though still a cold serpent coiled in her belly, was now intertwined with a fierce, protective love that defied all reason, all caution. Their clandestine meetings, once tinged with a hesitant curiosity, now burned with a desperate intensity. They knew the risks were multiplying with each stolen moment, yet the pull towards each other was as inexorable as the turning of the seasons in the Wyoming Territory. The forest, their only sanctuary, became a classroom. Nakoma, with the patience of the ancient trees that surrounded them, began to share the deep, intuitive knowledge of his people. He taught Lydia to read the subtle language of a broken twig, a disturbed patch of moss, the almost invisible print of a moccasin on damp earth. He showed her how to listen, truly listen, not just to the calls of birds or the rustle of unseen creatures, but to the whisper of the wind itself, to the heartbeat of the land. Her hands, accustomed to needlework and the cool porcelain of teacups, learned the feel of medicinal herbs, the texture of edible roots. Lydia, her mind sharp and her spirit hungry for such untamed knowledge, absorbed his teachings like the parched earth drank a summer rains. The change in her was palpable, a luminescence that even the drab confines of Fort Resolve could not entirely dim. She would return from her excursions into Whisperwind with a sparkle in her eyes that hadn't been there before, her cheeks flushed with a secret joy. Sometimes, clutched in her hand, would be a wildflower of a hue unseen within the settlement's cultivated gardens, or a smooth, gray river stone with a curious marking, perhaps even a single hawk feather, its edge sharp and perfect. Small, silent tokens from another world, another heart. Nakoma, too, bore the subtle marks of their forbidden love. In the solemn councils of the Cheyenne, where the talk was often of the encroaching white man and the dwindling herds of buffalo, his gaze would sometimes drift towards the distant, dark line of the forest, a profound pensiveness settling over his strong features. War Eagle, Nakoma's ambitious cousin, a young warrior whose eyes burned with a restless fire and a simmering resentment for Nakoma's status as Red Cloud's son and heir apparent, noticed these absences of spirit. He, and others among the younger, more impetuous braves, began to mutter, their words sharp with suspicion, questioning Nakoma's focus, his loyalty. Even the tribal elders, their faces impassive masks of weathered wisdom, watched him with a new, unsettling scrutiny. Within Fort Resolve, the atmosphere around Lydia grew equally charged. Josiah Thorne's disapproval, once a constant, low rumble of discontent, now sharpened into outright anger. He saw the change in his daughter, the quiet defiance in her eyes, the way she seemed to inhabit a world beyond his understanding, beyond his control. Martha, Lydia's older sister, fueled the flames of his suspicion, whether driven by genuine concern for the family's already precarious standing, or by a more insidious, gnawing jealousy of Lydia's untamed spirit. Martha's observations were always timed, always phrased, to cast Lydia's actions in the most damning light. She was gone for hours again today. Father, Martha would say, her voice laced with a feigned anxiety, said she was looking for berries, but her basket was near empty, and there was a wildness about her. Soon, ugly rumors, like tumbleweeds in a high wind, began to skitter through the dusty streets of the fort. Whispers of Thorne's youngest, consorting with a redskin, seen at the edge of Whisperwind with a painted savage. But the growing danger only seemed to deepen the bond between Lydia and Nakoma, lending their stolen moments an almost unbearable poignancy. One late afternoon, as the sun bled a fiery orange across the western sky, Nakoma led Lydia to a place they had never been before, a small, hidden clearing deep within the forest, beside a bend in the stream where an ancient, towering cedar stood like a silent, green-robed sentinel. The air here felt different, imbued with a stillness, a sanctity that hushed even the ever-present whisper of the wind. Nakoma turned to her, his face unusually solemn, the dying light catching the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the intense, unreadable depths of his dark eyes. He spoke, his voice low and resonant, the words a balm to her increasingly frayed nerves. He spoke of his love, a love that had taken root in his heart as unexpectedly, as powerfully, as a storm rolling in from the plains. He told her that his spirit recognized hers, that in her eyes he saw a reflection of the freedom his own soul craved. Then, drawing a small, razor-sharp skinning knife from the sheath at his belt, he turned to the massive trunk of the ancient cedar. With slow, deliberate strokes, he began to carve. Lydia watched, her breath catching in her throat, as a symbol took shape in the rough bark. A stylized bird in flight, its wings outstretched towards an unseen horizon. Beside it, slightly weathered by time, was another, almost identical carving. This, Nakoma said, his voice husky with emotion, "is the mark of my own spirit. And this," he gestured to the fresh carving, "this is for you, Aponi, butterfly." The name settled in Lydia's heart like a benediction. Lydia, he corrected himself, a rare, tender smile touching his lips. "You are the whisper wind in my heart, the star that guides my spirit through the darkest night. Though mountains may crumble and rivers cease to flow, these marks will remain, a testament to our love, a love that will never fade from this world. Your name, your image, they are forever etched in my mind, Lydia, and in the heart of my people, whether they choose to see it, to accept it, or not." Tears welled in Lydia's eyes, blurring the image of the carved bird, the strong, earnest face of the man before her. Her own love for him, a love she had tried to deny, to suppress, now surged through her, fierce and undeniable. "Oh, Nakoma," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I love you too, more than life itself. I fear nothing, nothing at all. When I am with you, I would walk through fire. I would face down the entire world's contempt, just to be by your side, just to be yours." Her hand reached out, her fingers tracing the fresh carving. Then his own, the rough bark, a tangible link between their two souls. Their idyll, however, was tragically, brutally short-lived, even as they stood bathed in the golden light of their shared vows, lost in a world of their own making. Another pair of eyes watched from the concealing shadows of a dense thicket some distance away. Martha Thorne, her face a mask of grim satisfaction mixed with a strange, almost fearful fascination, had followed Lydia. She had seen it all, the tender looks, the carved symbols, the whispered promises. Later, as dusk began to settle, casting long, eerie shadows through the forest, Lydia made her way back towards Fort Resolve alone. Nakoma, ever cautious, had melted back into the deeper woods, promising to meet her again in 2 days' time. Lydia's heart was light, filled with a soaring happiness, a defiant hope that for a moment made her forget the ever-present dangers that surrounded them. She was so lost in her reverie that she didn't hear the rustle in the undergrowth until Martha stepped out directly in her path, her face pale and set in an expression of cold fury. "Lydia," Martha's voice was a low, venomous hiss, startling Lydia so badly she stumbled back a step. "What in God's holy name do you think you are doing? Have you lost your mind entirely? Do you have any earthly idea what you risk, what shame you are bringing down upon our family, upon the Thorne name?" Her eyes, usually so placid, now glittered with a mixture of anger, fear, and something else, something Lydia couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps a bitter, corrosive envy, consorting with a red savage, in the forest, like some animal. "Are you utterly insane?" Lydia, caught off guard, her happiness instantly extinguished, felt a flush of anger rise to her own cheeks. "You don't understand, Martha," she retorted, her voice trembling slightly. "Nakoma, he's not like Father says. He's not like the others. I don't need to understand." Martha cut her off, her voice rising in pitch. "I don't want to understand. All I know, all anyone in this fort needs to know, is that you're playing with fire. Lydia, a fire that will consume not just you, but all of us. If Father discovers this abomination, he'll disown you. Or worse, he might even offer you to that savage's tribe as some sort of twisted peace offering, just to save his own skin, his own reputation." Martha took a step closer, her eyes boring into Lydia's. "You will end this. Lydia, this sickness. You will end it now, before it's too late for all of us. If you don't," her voice dropped to a chilling whisper, "I swear on our mother's grave, I will go to Father. I will tell him everything I saw today. Everything. Lydia stared at her sister, stunned into silence. The joy, the hope that had filled her heart only moments before, now lay shattered at her feet, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. Martha wasn't bluffing. The venom in her eyes, the tremor in her voice, told Lydia that this was no idle threat. Her love for Nakoma, a love she had just pledged her life to, was now caught in a deadly vice, squeezed between the implacable hatred of her father's world and the bitter ultimatum of her own flesh and blood. She stood at a precipice, the path ahead obscured by a gathering darkness, faced with a choice that seemed to offer no escape, only different shades of heartbreak and ruin. The fragile peace Lydia had found in Nakoma's vow by the ancient cedar was shattered by Martha's venomous ultimatum. The joy that had soared in her heart plummeted, crashing against the hard reality of her sister's threat. Back in the claustrophobic confines of Fort Resolve, the world seemed to shrink, the air thick with unspoken accusations and the ever-present shadow of her father's disapproval. Meanwhile, deep within the heart of the Cheyenne encampment, Nakoma faced his own reckoning, his increasingly frequent, solitary journeys towards Whisperwind Forest, a place Cheyenne warriors traditionally avoided unless on a war party or a sacred hunt, had not gone unnoticed. War Eagle, his cousin, a man whose ambition burned as fiercely as his gaze, had seen enough. His reports to the Council of Elders, and perhaps to Chief Red Cloud himself, were veiled in concerns for tribal security, for Nakoma's adherence to their sacred traditions, but the undercurrent of rivalry, of a desire to see Nakoma diminished, was unmistakable. One evening, as the smoke from the lodge fires curled towards the star-strewn Wyoming sky, Nakoma was summoned, not to the main council lodge, but to the more private, smoke-filled dwelling of a revered elder, a man named Stone Bear, whose wisdom was as ancient as the weathered lines etched on his face, a man who was the keeper of their oldest stories and laws. 2 other elders were present, their expressions grave, their eyes holding a deep, sorrowful concern. Chief Red Cloud was not there. This, Nakoma sensed, was a preliminary, a warning before the storm. "Nakoma, son of Red Cloud," Stone Bear began, his voice a low rumble, like distant thunder. "Your steps have led you often to the whispering trees, to the edge of the white man's shadow. The wind carries tales, and the eyes of our young warriors are sharp. They speak of a white woman." Nakoma stood before them, his posture respectful, yet with an unyielding stillness. He did not deny it. "It is true, honored elders. I have spoken with one from the fort, another elder, his name Black Kettle, a man known for his fiery oratory in his youth, spoke sharply. Spoken? Or has your heart become entangled, like a foolish bird in a snare set by a white trapper? Nakoma, you are the future of the people. The blood of Red Cloud flows in your veins. Your spirit must remain pure, your loyalty undivided. This path you walk, it is a path of thorns, leading to a bitter spring. It will bring only division, mistrust, and perhaps, Great Spirit forbid, a sorrow that will stain our lodges." Nakoma met their gazes, his own dark eyes holding a quiet but unbreakable resolve. "Respected fathers," he said, his voice calm, though a current of deep emotion ran beneath it. "The heart does not choose its resting place by the color of a woman's skin, nor by the lodge in which she was born. Lydia Thorne. She is not like the others. Her spirit is not crooked. She listens. She sees. There is no deceit in her. My love for her does not diminish my love for the people. It is not a betrayal." Stone Bear sighed, a sound like the wind through dry leaves. "Love, my son, can be a powerful medicine or a potent poison, especially when it bridges worlds that are at war. The white man takes our land, kills our buffalo, breaks his sacred word. How can there be true union with such a people? This woman, she may seem different to you now, but she carries their world within her, as you carry ours. Sooner or later, one world must yield to the other, or both will be torn asunder. The elder's warning was solemn, heavy with the weight of bitter experience. You must sever this bond, Nakoma, for your own sake, for the sake of your future, and the future of the people. If you do not, you will force the hand of the council, and the laws of our ancestors are unyielding. Nakoma left the lodge, the elder's words echoing in his mind, a heavy weight upon his spirit. He was now under a closer, more overt scrutiny. The path ahead had grown darker, more perilous. For Lydia, the confrontation with Martha had been the brutal opening salvo of her own domestic war. True to her word, Martha, her face a mask of sanctimonious concern, had unburdened herself to Josiah Thorne. His reaction was everything Lydia had feared, and more. The man's rage was a terrifying force of nature, a storm that broke over Lydia with devastating fury. He did not merely shout, he roared, his words a torrent of accusations, of shame, of a deep, visceral disgust that cut Lydia to the core. "A thorn," he bellowed, his face puce, his fists clenched. "My daughter," bedding down with a painted, heathen savage. "You're a stain on this family, an abomination. Did I raise you for this? To shame me before the entire fort, to bring this filth into my house." His hand, calloused and heavy from years of ranch work, lashed out, catching Lydia across the cheek with a force that sent her reeling, the taste of blood once again sharp in her mouth. "You will not leave this room," he thundered, his eyes blazing with a righteous, unreasoning fury. "Not until you've purged this sickness from your mind. Not until I find some decent, God-fearing white man to take you off my hands, to rid me of this disgrace." He was true to his word. Lydia found herself a prisoner in her own small bedroom. The window was nailed shut, the heavy wooden shutters bolted from the outside. A burly ranch hand, one of her father's most loyal men, was posted outside her door, a constant, silent reminder of her captivity. Beaten, humiliated, her heart aching with a despair so profound it felt like a physical wound, Lydia sank onto her narrow cot. But even in the depths of her misery, the image of Nakoma, his vow by the ancient cedar, the feel of his hand in hers, burned bright, a defiant ember refusing to be extinguished. Her love for him, her desperate yearning for freedom, became a silent, fierce rebellion against the walls that confined her. She began to plan, her mind working with a desperate clarity. She hoarded what little food was brought to her, hiding it beneath a loose floorboard. She worked tirelessly, patiently, using a sharpened piece of her broken hair comb to chip away at the wood around one of the window nails. She knew, with a certainty that transcended hope, that Nakoma would be waiting, watching. She had to reach him. She had to find a way. There was a small, trusted stable boy, young Timmy, who sometimes brought her water, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pity. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could be persuaded to carry a message, a small, coded signal only Nakoma would understand. Days bled into a suffocating, monotonous blur. Then, one night, the heavens themselves seemed to conspire with her. A storm rolled in from the west, a wild, furious tempest that lashed Fort Resolve with sheets of rain and a howling wind that rattled the very foundations of the buildings. The guard outside her door, miserable and soaked, grew lax, his attention diverted by the storm's fury. This was her chance. With trembling fingers, Lydia worked the last nail free. The shutter creaked open, the wind and rain instantly invading her small prison. The drop to the muddy ground below was farther than she'd anticipated, but there was no turning back. She threw out the small bundle containing her hoarded food and a spare shawl. Then, taking a deep breath, she swung herself out, her fingers scrabbling for purchase on the rough-hewn logs of the cabin wall. She landed heavily, her ankle twisting beneath her, a sharp stab of pain shooting up her leg. But she bit back a cry. Freedom! The rain plastered her hair to her face. The wind tore at her thin nightdress. But she had never felt so alive. She moved through the inky blackness of the fort like a wraith, her heart pounding, every shadow a potential threat, every gust of wind carrying the imagined sound of pursuit. She had to reach Whisperwind. She had to reach Nakoma. Nakoma, despite the watchful eyes of War Eagle and the elders, had felt the shift in the spirit wind. Lydia's absence at their prearranged meeting spot 2 days prior had gnawed at him, a cold premonition settling in his gut. Young Timmy, braving the edge of the Cheyenne territory under the guise of retrieving a stray calf, had managed to leave a small, almost invisible sign near their cedar tree. A single white dove feather, a symbol Lydia and Nakoma had once spoken of, a desperate plea. Tonight, under the cover of the raging storm, defying the direct orders of his father and the council, Nakoma had slipped away from the Cheyenne village, his warrior's senses screaming that a pony, his butterfly, was in dire peril. He found her by the stream, near the ancient cedar. Just as the first, faint hint of a bruised dawn began to pierce the storm clouds, she was a collapsed, shivering heap at the base of the tree, her face pale and streaked with mud and tears, her ankle grotesquely swollen. But when she saw him, her eyes, luminous in the pre-dawn gloom, blazed with an unutterable relief, a desperate, joyous recognition. Nakoma, her voice was a broken whisper. He was beside her in an instant, gathering her into his strong arms, his own heart aching at the sight of her battered, fragile state. Her tears mingled with the cold rain on his cheek. Words were unnecessary. In that desperate, clinging embrace, everything was understood. The brutality she had endured, the risks he had taken, the undeniable, unbreakable cord that bound their souls together. Nakoma, she sobbed, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world gone mad. I escaped. They locked me away. I can't go back. Nakoma, I won't. I would rather die out here, with you, than live another day in that prison. He held her tight, his voice a low, fierce rumble against her ear, a vow spoken to the storm and the dawning day. I know. Aponi. My Aponi. He used the Cheyenne name now. A claim. A promise. They will not have you back. I swear it on the graves of my ancestors. Let both our worlds turn against us. Let them send their warriors, their soldiers. We will face them. Together, I will shield you with my body, with my life, until my last breath is drawn. They knew, with a chilling certainty, that there was no sanctuary for them. Not in Fort Resolve, not in the Cheyenne lodges. Josiah Thorne's rage would be a relentless fire. Chief Red Cloud's disappointment, the council's judgment, would be equally unyielding. Their only hope, their only chance to breathe free, to live the love that had been forged in secrecy and defiance, lay in flight, together, into the vast, unknown, and perilous expanse of the Wyoming wilderness. As the storm finally began to abate, and a watery, gray dawn broke over the ravaged landscape, Nakoma gently tended to Lydia's injured ankle, his touch surprisingly tender. Then, lifting her into his arms, he carried her to where he had hidden his pony, hand in hand, or rather, with Lydia securely mounted before him. They turned their faces towards the wild, untamed horizon, leaving behind them the two worlds that had sought to crush their spirits, to deny their love. Their journey had just begun, a desperate flight into an uncertain future, with only their courage, their wits, and the fierce, unyielding bond between them as their guides. The Wyoming wilderness, a vast, indifferent canvas of sun-scorched plains, shadowed canyons, and wind-scoured peaks, became their brutal, unwilling host. Lydia and Nakoma moved as phantoms across its face, their flight a desperate, ragged prayer whispered against the relentless pursuit. Days bled into weeks, each dawn a raw reminder of their peril, each sunset a temporary reprieve steeped in exhaustion. Hunger gnawed, a constant ache in their bellies. Thirst was a tormenting demon, its whispers promising an agonizing end. The elements themselves seemed to conspire against them. The sun beat down like a blacksmith's hammer. Then sudden, unseasonable blizzards would sweep from the mountains, transforming the world into a blinding, frozen hell. Their tracks momentarily erased, only to be revealed anew when the weak sun returned. Nakoma, his spirit as resilient and unyielding as the ancient rock formations they traversed, was their guide, their shield. His Cheyenne upbringing had etched the harsh necessities of survival into his very bones. He taught Lydia, his Aponi, his butterfly, with a quiet, focused patience. He showed her how to find water where none seemed to exist, patiently explaining the subtle curl of a particular leaf, the dampness beneath a seemingly dry stone. His arrow, once a symbol of warning, now flew true to bring down a scrawny rabbit or a grouse, their meager sustenance. He taught her the silent language of the wild, the sudden alarm call of a jay that signaled intruders, the way the wind carried scents, the almost invisible indentation in the dust that spoke of a moccasined foot. He taught her to move like smoke, to leave no sign, to become one with the rustling grasses and the silent stones. And Lydia, stripped of every artifice of her former life in Fort Resolve, learned with a desperate, fierce intensity. The softness was gone, replaced by a whipcord resilience. Her hands, once familiar only with the smoothness of polished wood and the prick of a needle, grew calloused from gathering firewood and digging for roots. Fear was still her shadow, a cold companion, but it no longer paralyzed her. It was a whetstone, sharpening her senses, fueling her will to endure. Her love for Nakoma, a fierce, unwavering beacon in the terrifying darkness of their fugitive existence, and her absolute trust in his strength and wisdom, transformed her daily. Each small victory, finding a patch of edible berries, successfully tending a fire in the driving rain, understanding a subtle shift in the wind's direction, was a testament to her burgeoning strength. Yet the pursuit remained, a relentless, two-headed Cerberus snapping at their heels. From Fort Resolve, Josiah Thorne, his paternal love twisted by shame and a furious, unreasoning desire for retribution, had loosed his dogs. He'd hired a band of bounty hunters, men whose eyes were as cold and empty as a winter grave, led by a scarred, vicious man named Cutter, whose reputation for brutality was whispered in frightened tones even in the roughest saloons. Their orders were stark. Bring back the girl, by any means necessary. The Indian was expendable. Josiah himself, consumed by a righteous fury that bordered on madness, sometimes rode with them, his face a mask of grim determination, his presence a goad to their bloodlust. From the Cheyenne encampment, another party rode, their mission no less urgent, though born of a different, more complex sorrow. Chief Red Cloud, his heart a battlefield of grief for his lost son and his solemn duty to his people, had dispatched his most trusted warriors. At their head was War Eagle, Nakoma's cousin, his rival, a man whose ambition was a restless, predatory fire. War Eagle's mandate was clear. Nakoma was to be brought back, to face the judgment of the elders, to answer for the shame he had brought upon his lineage, for the traditions he had scorned, for the white woman who had, in their eyes, stolen his Cheyenne heart. These two forces, one driven by a father's vengeful rage and the promise of coin, the other by tribal law and a simmering, personal animosity, moved with a terrifying efficiency. Though their ultimate goals differed, their immediate quarry was the same. Unwittingly, they wove an ever-tightening net of pursuit, their separate paths converging, squeezing Lydia and Nakoma into an ever-shrinking pocket of wilderness. There were close calls, moments when a shifted wind carried the scent of horses too near, or a distant glint of sunlight off a rifle barrel sent them scrambling for deeper cover, their hearts hammering, their breath held tight. Sleep became a luxury, snatched in fleeting, exhausted moments, always one ear tuned to the slightest unfamiliar sound. The day came, as Nakoma knew it must, when the last thread of their flight frayed and snapped. They were deep within a jagged labyrinth of red rock canyons, a desolate, forgotten corner of the territory. Their horses, gallant creatures, had given their last, their legs swollen, their breath ragged. Their own strength was a flickering candle in a gale. Nakoma, his senses honed to a razor's edge, had read the signs for days. The pursuers were no longer just following. They were herding, anticipating, their movements coordinated, relentless. They were trapped. That evening, huddled in the meager shelter of a shallow cave, the wind whistling a mournful dirge through the canyon's teeth, Nakoma looked at Lydia, her face illuminated by the faint, dying embers of their tiny, smokeless fire, was gaunt, etched with lines of hardship and exhaustion that belied her youth. But her eyes, those incredible eyes that had first captivated him in Whisperwind Forest, still held a fierce, unyielding light. Aponi. His voice was a low, rough caress, heavy with a weariness that was more than just physical. We can run no more. They are upon us. By dawn, perhaps sooner, they will be at this cave's mouth. He paused, the silence stretching, filled only with the keening of the wind and the frantic beating of Lydia's heart. We have one choice left to make. My butterfly. One last, desperate run, until we fall from our feet and they take us like exhausted wolves. Or, he looked around at the formidable rock formations that surrounded them. Or we find our ground here, in these stones. We make our stand. We fight. His gaze met hers, unflinching. The spirits know. Our chances are slim as a winter shadow, but we will choose how we meet our end. Lydia listened, her gaze locked with his. The terror that had been her constant companion for so many weeks, the ingrained fear of her sheltered upbringing, had been scoured away, replaced by a core of tempered steel. Her love for Nakoma, a love that had been tested in the fires of adversity and found true, was now the bedrock of her being. I have been running my whole life. Nakoma, she said, her voice quiet, yet imbued with an astonishing, unshakable strength, running from what my father wished me to be, running from the judgment in my sister's eyes, running from the fear that whispered I was not enough. A faint, tender smile touched her lips, a smile that held no trace of self-pity, only a profound acceptance. But with you, my brave warrior, my heart's companion, I have found something worth more than just running. I have found something worth standing for. I will not run again. Her hand found his, her grip surprisingly firm. If this is where our story is to end, then let it end with us facing our enemies. Together, I will fight beside you. Nakoma, to my last breath, I will fight for our love, for our freedom. As the first, cold fingers of a grim dawn touched the towering canyon walls, they found their fortress a narrow, defensible defile, a natural bastion of tumbled boulders and sheer rock faces that offered a commanding, if desperate, view of the only viable approach. Time was a cruel, mocking enemy, with a frantic, focused intensity that bordered on the superhuman. They prepared. Nakoma, his movements economical and precise, his warrior's instincts taking over, fashioned crude but effective deadfalls from loose scree and precariously balanced rocks. He showed Lydia how to wedge smaller stones into crevices to create choke points. To narrow the already difficult passage, Lydia, her mind a clear, cold instrument of resolve, gathered their few remaining cartridges, her hand steady as she checked the action of her pistol, her heart a hard, determined knot in her chest. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the terrifying, exhilarating certainty of a final, desperate confrontation. The silence was profound, broken only by the rasp of their breathing and the occasional dislodged pebble skittering down the slope. It was a bitter, savage irony of fate that both Josiah Thorne's vengeful posse and War Eagle's disciplined Cheyenne warriors converged on the canyon's mouth almost simultaneously. For a taut, confusing moment, the two groups, sighting each other across the broken, shadowed terrain, eyed one another with a bristling, ingrained hostility. Rifles were half raised, curses muttered, a fragile, accidental standoff born of mutual suspicion. Then, Cutter, the lead bounty hunter, his scarred face split by a wolfish grin, spotted movement high in the rocks, a flicker of calico, Lydia, the momentary truce, if it could even be called that, shattered, greed, vengeance, and a twisted sense of tribal justice united the disparate groups in a common, savage purpose. The assault began, a chaotic, brutal wave of men, white and Cheyenne alike, surging up the narrow, treacherous defile, their shouts and war cries echoing off the canyon walls. And from their rocky sanctuary, Lydia and Nakoma met them with a desperate, coordinated fury that belied their meager numbers. Nakoma's rifle, an extension of his will, roared with deadly precision. His shots, fired with an almost preternatural calm, found their marks, bounty hunters and warriors alike tumbling back down the scree-strewn slope. Their cries cut short. Lydia, her fear transmuted into a cold, focused rage, fired her pistol with a steadiness that would have been unthinkable weeks before. Her bullets, though less lethally accurate than Nakoma's, kicked up dust around the attackers, forcing them to seek cover, disrupting their charge, buying precious seconds for Nakoma to reload. To shift position, the battle for the defile became a maelstrom of acrid gun smoke, a hellish cacophony of gunfire, ricocheting bullets, defiant war cries, and the agonized screams of the wounded and the dying. Nakoma fought like a cornered panther, a whirlwind of deadly grace and savage, protective intensity. He seemed to be everywhere at once, his movements a blur, his rifle and, when the fighting became too close, his long-bladed knife, reaping a grim and bloody toll on their attackers. He shielded Lydia with his own body, taking a bounty hunter's slug, aimed squarely at her, high in his left arm. The impact spun him around, a grunt of pain escaping his lips, but his return shot, fired even as he stumbled, sent the man sprawling into eternity. Lydia, no longer the sheltered, frightened girl from Fort Resolve, but a woman forged in the fires of adversity, fought beside him, a fierce, protective lioness, when a Cheyenne warrior, his face a mask of contorted fury, his war club raised, managed to scramble over the rocks and lunge at a momentarily exposed Nakoma. Lydia didn't hesitate. Her pistol, clutched in a two-handed grip, roared, the bullet catching the warrior squarely in the chest. A look of stunned, uncomprehending disbelief flashed across his face as he crumpled. His attack thwarted, Nakoma's life spared by her quick, decisive action. But the odds were insurmountable, a relentless, crushing tide. They were two souls against a score, then a dozen, then a dwindling, desperate handful. Their ammunition was nearly spent. Their strength, though fueled by love and a desperate courage, was beginning to ebb. War Eagle, his eyes burning with a hateful, triumphant light, his ambition overriding any lingering vestige of kinship, finally broke through their depleted defenses. His war lance, its point fire-hardened and razor-sharp, was aimed not at Lydia, but at the heart of the man he saw as his ultimate rival. Nakoma? It happened in a blur of desperate, fatal motion. Nakoma, already weakened by blood loss, his movement slowed by the agony in his arm and a dozen other, lesser wounds, saw the treacherous thrust too late to fully evade it. He twisted, a valiant, desperate effort, the lance head, instead of piercing his heart, tore a vicious, gaping wound in his side, just below the ribs. But in that same, fluid, dying motion, Nakoma brought his own knife up, a last, desperate, upward slash that found the exposed vulnerability of War Eagle's throat. His cousin fell, a gurgling, choking sound his only epitaph, his ambitions extinguished in a welter of his own blood. Nakoma sank to his knees, his lifeblood, a dark, shocking river, pouring out onto the unforgiving rock. Lydia was beside him in an instant, her own lesser wounds forgotten, her world contracting to this single, terrible point. She cradled his head in her lap, her tears falling hot and fast, mingling with the blood and dust on his pain-contorted face. The gunfire around them seemed to fade, the shouts and screams to recede into a distant, meaningless roar. Her universe had narrowed to the sight of his fading eyes, the sound of his ragged, shallow breathing. A pony, Nakoma gasped, his voice a faint, ragged whisper, a mere breath against the vast silence of the approaching void. His hand, slick with his own blood, reached up, trembling, to touch her cheek. My butterfly, live. You must live. His eyes, those dark, beautiful eyes that had once held such fire, such tenderness, such fierce, untamed life, began to glaze over, the light within them dimming. Our love, it does not end here. His breath hitched. A shudder ran through his powerful frame. Tell them. Tell our story. Tell? Nita? Nakoma? No. Please. No. Lydia's cry was a raw, broken sound, a lament torn from the very depths of her shattered soul. She pressed her lips to his, tasting his blood, his fading life, trying desperately, futilely, to breathe her own strength, her own will, into him. I will never forget. My love, never. Our love will live. I will live for us both. For Nita, I promise you. Nakoma, I promise. Josiah Thorne, his face a mask of stunned horror and a dawning, terrible, soul-shattering understanding, had pushed his way to the forefront of his few remaining, bloodied men. He saw his daughter, not the defiant, shamed creature he had relentlessly hunted, but a woman transformed by grief, cradling her dying Cheyenne lover, her face a portrait of unimaginable sorrow and a fierce, unyielding love that transcended all boundaries, all hatreds. He saw the carnage around them, the dead and dying, white man and Cheyenne alike, the bitter, bloody price of his own implacable prejudice, his own blind, destructive fury. Perhaps, in that moment, something within Josiah Thorne, something long dead and buried beneath layers of bitterness and pride, finally broke. Or perhaps it was the arrival of another figure, a man who rode into the blood-soaked, silent defile with the funereal dignity of a king surveying a lost and ravaged kingdom. Chief Red Cloud, drawn by the distant echoes of battle, by a father's unerring, agonizing premonition, had arrived. He took in the scene. His fallen warriors, the dead white men, his son, his pride, his Nakoma, now still and silent, his lifeblood staining the white woman's dress, the woman for whom he had defied everything, for whom he had given his last, valiant breath. The chief's face, usually so stoic, so impassive, seemed to crumble, the lines of an unbearable grief etching themselves deep into his weathered features. He looked at Lydia, at the profound, unutterable love that radiated from her even in her agony, a love that had clearly mirrored his son's. He looked at his son, his warrior, his hope, now still and silent upon the bloodied earth. I was wrong. Red Cloud's voice was a choked whisper, heavy with a grief that transcended words, a grief that finally, agonizingly, acknowledged a truth too long denied by pride and ancient enmities. The Great Spirit. He weaves strange and often painful blankets. Their love, it was a stronger medicine, a truer path, than our ancient laws, than our bitter, blinding hatreds. The battle for the canyon was over. Lydia Thorne was alone. Nakoma's precious lifeblood, a terrible, indelible stain on her hands, her dress, her very soul. But in the crushing desolation, in the unimaginable, searing pain of her loss, a new, terrible strength was being forged. Nakoma was gone, but their love, their story, the vibrant, indomitable echo of his spirit, would live on, in her, and in the child she now knew, with a sudden, intuitive, bittersweet certainty she carried within her. Nita, echo after thunder, a tiny, fierce spark of hope, a legacy of love, in a world that seemed consumed by darkness and despair. The fight for survival had just entered a new, more solitary, and infinitely more challenging, more poignant chapter. The silence that descended upon the blood-soaked defile in the wake of the battle was a physical entity, a crushing weight that pressed down on Lydia Thorne, more profound and terrifying than the preceding cacophony of gunfire and war cries. It was the silence of finality, of lives brutally extinguished, of a grief so immense it had no voice. The Wyoming winced, which had moments before carried the screams of the dying and the defiant shouts of warriors, now whispered a mournful dirge through the jagged rock spires, stirring the dust that was already beginning to settle like a grim shroud over the carnage. The air, thick and cloying, reeked of gunpowder, the metallic tang of fresh blood, and the disturbed, raw scent of the earth itself, outside the shattered remnants of their makeshift fortress. The ground was a testament to the savage fury of the conflict. Nakoma's kin, men who had hunted beside him, now lay still beside the pale-faced bounty hunters Josiah Thorne had unleashed. War Eagle, his ambition forever silenced, lay a stone's throw from his cousin, his once fierce eyes staring blankly at the indifferent, bruised sky. It was a hideous tableau, a butcher's reckoning tallied in shattered bodies and stolen futures. Yet it was also the undeniable, brutal proof of their desperate stand, their impossible defiance. And Nakoma, her Nakoma, Lydia cradled his lifeless head in her lap, his dark hair, usually so vibrant, now matted with his own precious blood. It soaked into the tattered fabric of her dress, a warm, sticky tide that seemed to drain the very life from her own veins, a stark, crimson testament to their love and his ultimate, selfless sacrifice. His eyes, those fathomless pools of obsidian that had once burned with such fierce, untamed life, such tender, knowing understanding, were now vacant, staring unseeing at the vast, uncaring canvas of the sky. Aponi, his butterfly, the name he had given her, a name that had made her heart soar, was now a broken, silent scream within the hollow chambers of her soul. The pain was a living thing, a wild beast with claws and teeth, tearing at her, hollowing her out, leaving an abyss where joy, hope, and a love that had felt as vast as the plains had so briefly, so beautifully, resided. She didn't know how long she sat there, the wind tugging at her own unbound hair, rocking him gently as if he were merely asleep, her tears carving clean, desolate paths through the grime and blood that streaked her cheeks, whispered endearments, fragments of shared memories, promises of a future that would never be, fell from her lips, lost on the desolate wind. The remaining few of Thorne's men, their faces pale and shaken, their bravado extinguished, had already dragged their wounded, whimpering master away, a stumbling, inglorious retreat from a victory that tasted only of ash and bitter regret. Chief Red Cloud stood a short distance off, a figure carved from ancient, sorrowing stone, his gaze fixed on his fallen son, his face an unreadable mask that could not entirely conceal the seismic tremor of grief that was shattering his stoic chief's demeanor. He had arrived too late, a grim spectator to the final, tragic act of a drama born of prejudice, fear, and a love that had dared to defy two worlds. Eventually, a profound, almost preternatural calm, the chilling stillness that lies at the eye of a hurricane of grief, settled over Lydia. Nakoma was gone. His warmth, his strength, his voice, the very essence of him, had been stolen from her, from the world, but he had left a part of himself behind, a tiny, precious, fiercely protected spark. Nita, their child, the echo after thunder he had unknowingly, prophetically, named with his dying breath. For him, for their child, she would live, she would endure, with a strength born of that terrible new resolve. Lydia gently laid Nakoma's head upon a bed of fragrant pine needles she gathered from beneath a nearby stunted tree. She could not bear the thought of leaving him to the carrion birds, to the indifferent hunger of the wilderness he had so deeply loved and understood. Using Nakoma's own razor-sharp hunting knife, her hands, already raw and blistered from the fight, now bleeding anew from the unaccustomed labor, she began the arduous, heartbreaking task of digging a shallow grave in the rocky, unforgiving soil at the base of a sentinel pine. It was a desperate, solitary ritual, her grief a silent, raw-edged companion, each movement a testament to her shattered heart. Chief Red Cloud watched from a distance, his expression unreadable, his remaining warriors standing like stone figures, their faces grim. Perhaps it was a flicker of grudging respect they felt for this white woman who honored their fallen brother with such fierce and unwavering devotion. Or perhaps it was a dawning, terrible shame for the part they had played in his demise. They made no move to interfere, nor to help. This was her burden, her sacred, solitary duty. When it was done, when Nakoma lay sheltered beneath the earth, he had walked with such pride. Lydia smoothed the disturbed soil with her trembling hands. She found the single, perfect eagle feather that had been clutched in his cold, still hand, a feather he had once told her symbolized courage, vision, and the Great Spirit's blessing, and placed it gently upon the freshly turned earth. A warrior's farewell, a lover's lament. The heavy silence that followed was broken by Red Cloud. He approached Lydia, his movements slow, each step seeming to carry the weight of an unbearable sorrow. "He was my son," the chief said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp, the words seeming to tear themselves from the very fabric of his soul, each syllable an admission of a pain that defied expression. "The bravest of my warriors, the brightest hope of our people." He looked at the simple grave, then at Lydia, his eyes, so achingly like Nakoma's, now filled with a profound, fathomless sorrow, a grief that mirrored her own. "And I have lost him. I let the old hatreds, the rigid laws of our fathers, the whispers of ambitious men, blind me to the truth of his noble heart. The mind of a chief, it seems," his voice broke, "can be a foolish, stubborn thing when it forgets the wisdom that resides in the heart of a father. I I have failed him. I have failed the people. He paused, the admission a painful, ragged exhalation that seemed to drain the last vestiges of his proud chief's strength. Your love for him, his love for you. He gestured vaguely, his hand trembling. It was a strong medicine, a sacred fire, stronger than my pride, stronger, perhaps, than our ancient enmities, our bitter memories. He turned away, then, a man visibly broken, his shoulders slumped beneath an invisible, crushing burden, and with a barely perceptible gesture to his warriors, they melted into the trees, leaving Lydia alone once more, alone with her grief, alone with the silent, watching mountains, and alone with the tiny, precious secret she carried within her. Josiah Thorne, his shoulder crudely bandaged, his face a mask of gray, hollow-eyed shock and a dawning, terrible comprehension, had been forced by his few remaining, equally shaken men to witness the full, horrific aftermath of his own vengeful folly. He had seen his daughter, Lydia, not the defiant, shamed creature he had relentlessly hunted, but a woman transformed by love and loss, cradling her dying Cheyenne lover with a tenderness and a grief that had seared itself onto his soul. He had seen the life drain from that warrior's eyes, and in doing so, had seen the spirit in his own daughter shatter, only to be reforged, in that very moment of unbearable agony, into something harder, something colder, something he no longer recognized, something that accused him with every silent, tear-tracked breath, the shame he had sought to erase, to punish, had instead been magnified 1,000-fold, branded onto his conscience with the hot iron of his daughter's unimaginable suffering and the spilled blood of the man she had so clearly, so fiercely loved. That torment, that crushing, belated remorse, would be his constant companion for the rest of his miserable days. The ride back to Fort Resolve was a journey through his own personal, self-made hell, each hoofbeat of his horse a nail hammered into the coffin of his pride, his prejudice, his very soul. The story of Lydia Thorne and the Cheyenne warrior, when its brutal, tragic details eventually trickled back to the stunned settlement, would not be the tale of righteous justice Josiah had envisioned. It would become a chilling, cautionary legend, whispered in hushed tones, a bitter, indelible lesson in the devastating, irrevocable cost of hatred, intolerance, and a father's blind, destructive fury. Lydia did not, could not, return to Fort Resolve. There was nothing for her there but a father's empty rage, a sister's bitter betrayal, and a community's unforgiving judgment. She carried Nakoma's child, their Nita, a secret, sacred, fiercely protected trust. She knew, with an unshakable certainty born of love and loss, that she must shield this last, precious legacy of their union from the harshness of both their worlds. She found her way, driven by a desperate instinct and Nakoma's whispered descriptions, to a hidden, sheltered valley, a place he had once spoken of in their stolen moments beneath the ancient cedar, a place of whispering winds and clear, sweet water, a place they had idly, joyfully, dreamed might one day be their own, a sanctuary where two worlds might meet in peace. Here, she would make her stand, not with guns and knives, but with the quiet, fierce, unyielding determination of a mother. Months bled into seasons, each one a fresh challenge, a new lesson in endurance. Lydia, drawing upon the survival skills Nakoma had so patiently taught her, and upon an inner resilience she had never known she possessed, survived. She built a small, crude shelter against the biting Wyoming winters, its walls chinked with mud and hope. She learned to hunt with Nakoma's bow, her aim growing surer with each passing moon. She learned to trap small game, to forage for edible roots and berries, to read the subtle, intricate signs of the changing land. She was no longer Lydia Thorne of Fort Resolve, nor even just a pony, Nakoma's butterfly. She was becoming something new, something forged in fire and grief, something as wild and untamed as the land itself. And soon, she would be Nita's mother. Help sometimes came, in unexpected, silent ways, like answers to prayers she hadn't dared to voice. An old, scarred elk skin, carefully folded and left near her shelter's entrance, filled with dried buffalo meat and parched corn. A clandestine offering from a remorseful Red Cloud. Perhaps his profound grief finding a hesitant, anonymous outlet in this fragile protection of his unknown grandchild. Or perhaps it was the work of one of the younger Cheyenne warriors, men who had secretly admired Nakoma's courage, his defiance of their more rigid traditions, now seeking to honor his memory in this small, significant way. Once, after a particularly harsh spell of sickness, she found a small bundle of carefully wrapped herbs, plants known for their potent healing properties, left by the stream near where she drew her water. Could it have been Elias Thorne, the kind-hearted, principled blacksmith from Fort Resolve, his conscience stirred by the tragics, whispered tale of her fate? Or even Martha, her sister, finally, belatedly, understanding the terrible, irrevocable price of her fear and jealousy, seeking a silent, distant, and wholly inadequate atonement? Lydia never knew for sure, and she never sought to find out. She accepted these small, anonymous kindnesses as gifts from the spirits, faint but persistent signs that perhaps, even in a world so steeped in hatred and misunderstanding, compassion could still find a way to flicker, to bloom in the most unexpected of places. Nita was born as the first wildflowers tentatively painted the valley floor in the vibrant hues of spring. A tiny, perfect, miraculous fusion of two worlds, her eyes holding the dark, piercing intelligence of her father, her spirit already imbued with the resilient, untamable fire of her mother. Lydia raised her on stories of Nakoma, the brave warrior, the gentle lover, the wise teacher. She sang her the ancient, haunting songs of the Cheyenne, taught her the myriad ways of the forest, the names of the stars, the whispers of the wind, and from the few tattered books she had managed to salvage from her desperate flight, she taught her the letters and numbers, the stories and histories of the white man's world. She instilled in her a deep, abiding respect for both heritages, a fierce belief in the common, sacred humanity that lay beneath the superficial, often divisive, differences of skin and custom. Years passed, flowing like the clear stream through their hidden valley. The raw, searing agony of Lydia's grief for Nakoma gradually softened, transforming over time into a quiet, enduring ache, a poignant, bittersweet melody that underscored the fierce, protective joy she found in her daughter. The story of the white woman and the Cheyenne warrior who had loved so fiercely, so tragically, so defiantly, became a whispered legend in the scattered, isolated settlements and the nomadic, ever-shifting camps of the vast Wyoming territory. Whisperwind Valley, as some of the more imaginative, more sympathetic storytellers began to call Lydia's hidden sanctuary, became a place imbued with a quiet awe, a potent symbol of a love that had dared to defy a hateful, unforgiving world, a love that had, in its own tragic way, triumphed. One evening, when Nita was a young woman, tall and straight as a lodgepole pine, her eyes holding both her father's profound wisdom and her mother's resilient, indomitable spirit, she stood with Lydia on a high ridge overlooking their secluded valley. The sun was setting, painting the vast Wyoming sky in breathtaking hues of fiery orange, deep rose, and bruised, melancholic purple. "They called my father's love for you forbidden, Mother," Nita said, her voice clear and strong, echoing the quiet confidence, the deep sense of self, that Lydia had so painstakingly, so lovingly, nurtured in her. They called your love for him a tragedy, a path that could only lead to ruin and despair. But I look at my life, at the lessons you've taught me, at the vibrant, honorable memory of the man you have kept alive, not just in stories, but in my heart, in my very blood. And I see no tragedy. I see courage. I see sacrifice. I see a love so profound, so powerful, it could not be broken. Not by hatred, not by prejudice, not even by the cruel finality of death. She turned to Lydia, her eyes, so like Nakoma's, shining with a fierce, unwavering pride. Their story, our story, Mother, is not a lament. It is an anthem, a song of defiance, of hope, and I will sing it. I will carry it forward, in my words, in my actions, in the way I live my life, so that no one ever forgets the warrior who dared to love beyond boundaries, and the woman who dared to love him back, so that perhaps, one day, other hearts, lost in their own deserts of fear and prejudice, will find the courage to choose love, even when the world around them screams only for hate. Lydia looked at her daughter, her Nita, her echo after thunder, the living, breathing, beautiful embodiment of her eternal love for Nakoma, a slow, peaceful smile, a smile that held a universe of sorrow, of joy, of acceptance, touched her lips. The wind, no longer a mournful, desolate dirge, seemed to whisper through the ancient pines, carrying not the echoes of past grief, but the promise of a new dawn, a future where the bridges Nita was destined to build might one day span the seemingly unbridgeable chasms of ignorance and fear. Nakoma's legacy, their legacy, was safe. It would endure. It would echo. It would, in its own quiet, powerful way, change the world.